Hi, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
Today we look at the 10 worst intersections in Massachusetts.
I'm now standing at the worst intersection in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That is not according to me. That is according to the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, the big old DOT. They took a look at accident statistics, fatal accidents, bodily injury accidents, property damage accidents at all of the intersections in Massachusetts, and they rated the top 200 worst accident-prone intersections in the entire state of Massachusetts. This is the worst one. Where am I standing? Okay, stay tuned. We'll tell you.
What are the 10 worst intersections? How did they pick these?
The Department of Transportation in Massachusetts took a look at all of the accident reports that came in, and they analyzed them, and they weighted them, and they took a look at where they happened, how they happened, how much property damage was done, how much injury took place, and fatal accidents obviously got weighted a little bit more in their formula. And then they came up with the 200 worst accidents. And there's a list. You can go online and see all the data in typical bureaucratic governmental form, how they came up with these 200 worst intersections. We're only going to take a look at the top 10.
Do you personally have a worst intersection in Massachusetts?
Oh, absolutely. Near my office, where I was in North Andover for a long time, there's a double-decker bridge where Route 495 goes over the top, and then some local roads come all together. They're squeezed together on an underdeck, and so they call it the double-decker bridge. If you're not familiar with the Merrimack Valley, the traffic reporters are always talking about the double-decker bridge. There's an accident there. There's a traffic bottleneck there. They actually shut it down partially for a number of years to redo it. It's not unusual, especially in the summertime, for them to do construction there. And I worked in North Andover. Now I'm in Methuen, but I worked in North Andover for many, many years. And it was not unusual for me to have to go around that double-decker bridge because it was just a nightmare. Do you have an accident prone area or an area in Massachusetts you hate the most?
There was this roundabout south of the Boston airport, and oh my gosh, there was like 3 lanes. There were no lines in the road. People were coming in and out, and were 2 lanes coming in, 2 lanes coming out. I don't even know. It was fine. We got through just fine. But it blows my mind that you could have these crazy huge roundabouts and they're not even marked out or anything. It was insane.
And the funny thing about roundabouts and rotaries, or whatever they want to call them, traffic circles, and we'll probably do a podcast on that a separate time. And the reason we're going to separate it out is in this study only looked at standard traditional 4-way intersections, Y intersections, and T intersections, which cause T-bone crashes. So they only looked at standard traditional intersections, and they excluded rotaries, and they also excluded those areas where interstate exit and entrance ramps all come together. So the study only looks at intersections, and so I think the result is skewed. Let's look at the 10 worst intersections in all of Massachusetts. Lainey, do you want to start?
For the 10th worst intersection in Massachusetts, we're looking at an overhead view of St. James Avenue and St. James Boulevard in Springfield. That 4-way intersection is just to the right or the east of a Y intersection, just below an X-shaped intersection with a number of commercial businesses. It's not hard to see how drivers can get confused in that area. In the study period, there were 460 accidents at this intersection.
Intersection 9 is in Chelsea, Broadway and 3rd Street, not far from the Mystic River Bridge. Look at this. The intersection is one of the main intersections in Chelsea, a busy little town, yet look how narrow it is. There were 470 crashes at this intersection during the study period.
For intersection number 8, we go to Holyoke and the intersection of High Street and Cabot Street. Look how open the area is. I can just see people speeding through. There were 477 accidents at this intersection during that time period involved.
The 7th worst intersection in Massachusetts is Main Street at Plainfield Street in Springfield. The reason we're screening the map view is to show how Plainfield comes in at an angle into what is also, in addition to that angle, a 4-way intersection. plus the complicating factor of a nearby exit ramp from Interstate 291. It's just a traffic nightmare. There were 479 crashes at this location during the study period.
The sixth worst intersection in Massachusetts. These are two relatively major through streets. I can see people coming into this intersection at a high speed, maybe not paying attention. And despite the fact it's relatively open, there were 491 accidents during that study period.
I guess a common thread is that people don't pay attention, but just going through these top, the first 5 in our group of 10 worst intersections, do you see any trends there?
So I guess one thing that I'm noticing is some of them seem like they could be a little bit more complicated. It's like, here's the X and here's the Y. And it kind of makes sense because when you think of Massachusetts, a lot of these roads were just like roads that existed before cars that they kind of just made into roads. So I think that it's a little bit chaotic just as a state itself. You know, I think that there are things that you can't really prevent with how it was pre-designed already. That's in my opinion, at least.
Well, they do call Boston roads cow paths because, I mean, historically, people actually many, many years ago grazed their cattle in downtown Boston, and they would bring their cattle into the Boston Common area. I mean, that's just what they did. And if you look at a map, you can see that the roads are every which way they wind around, and they were, in fact, cow paths that they did. I mean, you're right. They did eventually turn them into streets and highways. Some of the things that I noticed as we went through those intersections and we looked at them were a lot of times signage is confusing. Do you ever go to an intersection and you see so many signs or so few signs that you're coming into the intersection and you have no idea which way to go?
Honestly, I am fortunate now that I'm kind of at the point where I'm used to driving in Boston and Massachusetts. But even just going into Boston from New Hampshire, I want to say, I might be mistaken on this, when you take 93 down and you're going into Boston where that tunnel is, that area where it's like you have some people merging from the left and then some people are coming in from the HOV lane and then it's going into the tunnel and then you have all these people not knowing which way they're going in the tunnel. So I guess that to me, it makes sense that like people could be confused. There's not too much signage there. It's like once like the exit's coming up, then you're going, and then also it's underground. So it's like the GPS isn't even helping you. So things can get a little confusing there. Fortunately, they have like signs for the airport. So they put little planes on the road, and that's universal that anybody could understand. But it does get a little confusing in there, you know.
Right. So signage is often very confusing, especially in the Boston area. But also, I've spent a fair amount of time in Springfield and Worcester also. But those city streets are not clear at all. One of the other things that I find as a factor in some of these very dangerous intersections is that the markings on the road have gone away. You can tell that maybe at some point somebody painted yellow and white lines, but they've just gone away. They're not there anymore. So one example is going into Lawrence District Court in Lawrence. If you go from 93 down Water Street crosses over Broadway, and at that intersection, all the years that I've done that intersection, I cannot figure out if where Water Street comes to Broadway, or it's 2 lanes or 1 lane. If I try and make it a 2 lane, people honk at me. If I try and make it a 1 lane, people honk at me. Maybe people, is there something on my car that says honk? But a lot of intersections are like that. They may have had lines painted at one time to designate the lanes, but those lines are gone and people just drive however they want to drive.
And I agree with that too. That's like pretty common in Massachusetts, where like even on the highway sometimes it's like a 3-lane highway and all of a sudden all the lanes are gone. It's like, you know, like I'm gonna just go straight and just hope for the best. It's just like this guy's getting a little close to me, but like
Another factor that I find at intersections, and it's not by design, but sometimes the potholes are so huge,
oh my God.
Especially in the spring, the early spring, the late summer. The potholes and other defects in these roads are so bad that people go around them, and in going around them, they're not looking at the other traffic on the road, and I think that causes a lot of accidents. I mean, that's a pretty bad factor. Another factor that I think involves, and I don't want to just bash Massachusetts because I think it happens in a lot of places, but sometimes the lights are not timed properly and people just lose their patience. I mean, if you sit at a red light, and there's actually an accident case in New Hampshire, we'll talk about the 10 worst intersections in Massachusetts. We're not just bashing Massachusetts. We will talk about the 10 worst intersections in New Hampshire. But there's a New Hampshire case where the traffic lights were timed so poorly that a guy in the middle of the night just got really impatient and went into the intersection through a red light, and don't you know, a really horrible accident came out of that, and that was a lawsuit. Some of the other factors are other things that get in the way and obstruct vision, like bushes. Did you ever get to an intersection where there's a bridge abutment or a bush or a wall or something like that, and you look and you can't see?
There is a spot, this is not in Massachusetts, this is in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is notorious for this, where you're trying to move through an intersection and it's just like you get to that, like you can't even like look to the right, you can't even see if there's any oncoming traffic. It's, unfortunate because it's like some people have their property, some people have their houses, but in Puerto Rico is very notorious for, it's like you can't even see like when people are coming. So that, to me, especially in some place as crowded as Massachusetts, definitely makes sense.
Yeah, there's an intersection in Worcester. Every time I go to court in Worcester and I'm headed back to get on I-90, you go outside of Worcester, you go past the post office on one of the major arteries, and to get back onto the interstate, you go under the interstate, and you're going to take a left turn to go onto the interstate, and not as much of a left turn to go on the local road. Well, the problem is the bridge abutment for the interstate is so close to the road, you can't see until you actually get out into the intersection whether you're taking that sharp left or a partial left. So road obstructions in Puerto Rico, fine, but in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the country, those obstructions that keep people from seeing where the traffic is, I think do, in fact, cause accidents. If you can't see where you're going, there's a good likelihood you're going to have an accident.
Yeah, and I guess that makes me wonder what exactly would make like a bad intersection, like other than, we want unobstructed views when we're turning left and right. What can go into making some intersections a little bit safer? What do you think?
Well, the Massachusetts DOT, because they've been doing these studies for years and years and years, one of the things that they did is they got rid of a rotary. Signage, I think, to answer your question, signage, better signs, painting the lines, making sure there aren't obstructions, making the roadways clear, because let's remember, maybe you and I drive the same roads every day, but there are people from out of town. There are tourists that go to Boston and New Hampshire all the time, and they're from out of town, and they might have just rented a car at the airport, and they don't know where they're going. But to get back to the rotary, there was a horrible rotary not far from my office in Methuen, the dreaded Route 110 rotary. That's what it was called, the Route 110 rotary, because you're coming over from Lowell on Route 110 or 113, and then the rotary went underneath Route 93, and if you played your cards right, you could get onto the entrance ramp to Route 93 north or south. But half the time, people didn't do it right, and they went the wrong way. So that rotary used to be ranked as one of the worst intersections in all of Massachusetts. Well, at some point, and I did a blog article on this actually some years ago, at some point after doing a study like this and actually looking at the results, the Massachusetts DOT decided, you know what, that is a horrible rotary, and they did away with it. It took them a while, and it was like the Big Dig North. They got rid of the rotary, and they just made it interchanges, and I don't know if it's any better. Maybe it's because I do go through that rotary quite a bit, having an office nearby in Methuen and going to court in Lawrence, and also elsewhere in the Merrimack Valley. It's better from my point of view now that it's not a rotary anymore, but I can see how people coming from outside the area would be confused by that. So nice try, Mass DOT. Whether you did it or not, I don't know.
Yeah, and even, like, I don't know, like, I agree with you how you said that, like, a lot of the people is just, like, if you played your cards right, you could get on to where you're trying to go. A lot of the times, rotaries, and I wonder if it's because they're not as common or we're just not used to them, a lot of the times they can cause, like, confusion and stuff, so I totally see that, and I totally see, like, fixing that up. And I guess something, too, to think about as well, we live in New England, and between just like animals, like, fortunately Massachusetts, I mean, fortunately, but it's like densely populated, so you're not going to see as many like woodland creatures, running through the streets, but things like potholes, people trying to like make their ways out. There's like so many different things that can impact like how people are going to drive, aside from the fact like, are they from the area, which in Massachusetts, like you mentioned, a lot of people are traveling. So it makes sense that there's a lot of confusion. Oh my God, there's potholes in the road. Oh my God, I'm going to ruin my new rental car's tires, things like that. It's just like the absolute insanity of driving in Boston a lot of times.
Right, I agree. So why don't we now take a look at the top 5 worst intersections in the entire state of Massachusetts. So we're going to count down from 5 to 1. Number 5 is in Lowell. At number 5, I actually went over to Lowell and the intersection of Appleton Street and Central Street. As the name might imply, this is one of the central areas in Lowell. It is 1 block away from the main downtown artery of Middlesex and Green Streets, and near a curved feeder speedway, also known as Veterans Way. It's a mishmash of different urban streets. Just as an aside, the first time I ever went to Lowell many, many years ago for a summer job, I got lost at this very intersection. I gave up and parked at an adjoining parking lot and walked to the job interview. So I can see other people unfamiliar with Lowell being lost and confused, and that's not a good situation for accidents. In fact, there were 592 accidents here during the study period.
So if you're done taking a trip down memory lane, let's look at number 4. Now we're seeing Ash Street and West Elm Street in Brockton. This is the 4th worst Massachusetts intersection. Look at that row of hedges right up to the intersection. Speaking of obstructions possibly preventing a clear view of traffic, and also notice on the opposite side of the intersection, a rock wall is also right up to the meeting point of the streets. There were 636 accidents at this intersection during the time period of the study.
Okay, we were talking about Boston a minute ago. Intersection number 3 takes us to Morton and Harvard Streets in Boston. It's not far from Blue Hill Avenue and also American Legion Highway, 2 of the main thoroughfares in that section of Boston. Notice the shade there. Those buildings right up against the street in this congested area cast a shadow, which could cause vision problems as a driver's eyes adjust and readjust to bright sun and then shade. A total of 644 accidents at this Boston intersection.
The second worst intersection takes us just to the south of Boston, in Milton at Randolph Avenue and Chickatawbit. These are 2 parkway-type roads with a lot of traffic through that area south of the city itself. With those parkway speeds and through traffics thinking they can just keep going, this location saw 660 accidents during the time of the study.
So the thing that's surprising is that there weren't more accidents in Boston, because you think of it, the streets are confusing, you've got tourists, you've got students, you've got commercial traffic. You've always got trucks going under those bridges on Storrow Drive and bashing the top of their trucks. You've got, students at Boston University, Northeastern, all the other schools. And so you would think that there would be more accidents listed in the study in Boston, wouldn't you?
Yeah, especially because like Boston being so densely populated, it's interesting to me that most of these accidents are happening outside of it, when it's just like you have, hundreds of thousands, millions of people just like in condensed areas that you can barely even park in a lot of the time.
Right. We talked about this in a previous podcast about studies, and I know that the Department of Transportation spent a lot of time and they crunched a lot of data and they looked at the statistics. But I think that the study itself is flawed. We already mentioned the fact that it only takes a look at intersections, and it doesn't take a look at rotaries. It doesn't take a look at interchanges where on and off ramps come together in a mishmash often. And it also doesn't look at straightaways that are dangerous. I mean, you were talking about going into the southern part of the city. The Southeast Expressway always has been confusing to me. Route 93 has always been confusing to me when you're going in through Somerville. The Massachusetts Pike. So these straightaways are just as bad, and I think just as many accidents occur there and in rotaries, but those accidents aren't included in this study. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that is really weird. And it's, I guess, like to me, I guess it makes sense in some degrees, like the study's focusing on intersections. But a lot of the times, like how you mentioned with like the straightaways, is just like you'll have like people like trying to go in and out of traffic and acting all crazy. So it's interesting also to me that knowing that it's these particular intersections that we're taking a look at, that they haven't really done much to correct that when they're saying, when this study is basically saying these intersections are the problem. When, accidents can happen in so many different ways. Like you said, there's probably more locations that probably get a lot more accidents, I'd imagine.
Yeah, don't you think that a lot of it is, well, I mean, look, it took them 3 years to do this study. They looked at a 3-year period. And these road projects are so expensive. I mean, for example, the Big Dig took 10, 12, 13, 14 years before they had the whole thing ironed out. The rotary that they redid that I was talking about a little bit earlier, that took a long time. And these projects cost a lot of money, and in a state where it takes them forever to get through the budgeting process. So that's one problem. The other reason I think that the study is subject to questioning is because something I alluded to before, and that is these accident reports aren't always filled out. In the old days, you had a 2-page accident report. It was a piece of paper. You put your name and address and insurance company and the same information for the other driver on the first page. Then you turned it over. You drew a little diagram. You told them what the weather was. You were done. Bada bing, bada boom. It was a simple process. Now, the accident reports themselves are 5 pages, 1 whole page of instructions on how to fill out the accident report. Then you've got to fill out all kinds of things about conditions, and they're coded with numbers. Well, was this a number 011 accident? Was this a number 048 accident? And so it's a lot more complicated. And the DOT itself, if you read way, way deep into the study, they themselves say that this is significant in that the number of accidents that are reported has actually gone down. So the 9 accidents we've talked about before actually, represent those accidents that are actually reported by either the police or operators who fill out operators' reports. But that leaves out a lot. And maybe people that caused their own accidents didn't report them.
And that makes sense to me too, because something I didn't even really originally think about when we're talking about these intersections. I'm not sure exactly where in Boston this is, but there is one spot where the roads are so narrow that in order to make like certain left-hand turns, you either need to be on the sidewalk or like sideswiping someone's car. I remember I thought it was insane that people would even park here. I was driving to this one area. There were all these cars, just their sides like completely torn up from just people trying to make that turn and not wanting to go on the sidewalk. And it makes me think like how many of those people are reporting that their car got scratched up. They like knew that they parked in a dangerous spot. So it makes sense that not everybody's reporting everything that's happening, especially when you're taking, your own calculated risk at that point.
And a lot of times people want to avoid their own insurance companies. I mean, repairs to a vehicle, if it's not a personal injury accident, people want to avoid putting the claim in through their own insurance company, which I haven't always understood, but they feel that it's cheaper to do it themselves, or they might have a friend that can bang the dents out themselves. So they may not want to report the accident at all, even though they've been paying for insurance for years and years and years. So they might figure, oh, geez, you know what? Let's just, take care of it, and we're not going to report the accident. So the 9 accident intersections that we've taken a look at so far are according to the traffic statistics, and they're according to the data that has been reported. But it doesn't cover the intersections we've talked about, and it doesn't cover accidents that are unreported. One of the things that we have to mention here, we've been talking about intersections and bad driving conditions and potholes and things like that. Our podcast is called About the Law. What does all these accidents have to do with the law? Well, a lot of times people will have an accident and they'll say, oh, that was a bad road, and let's blame the town. Haven't you heard that?
It's always somebody else's fault. What do you mean? I had a psychology teacher who was saying, like, when we're speeding, when we're being bad drivers, like, there's always something important happening. And then she's like, but what about when you see someone else driving like a maniac? And I was just like, they're driving like a crackhead. Like, and it's just like everybody, there's always something going on that's important to you, and everybody else is the problem.
So it's what you're saying is you've got to pay attention to your own driving, and it's really the fact that if we're negligent, we don't want to admit it, and you can't blame the accident. You have to look at the conduct of the driver. Maybe the driver had legitimate reasons for being distracted, maybe 99% of the time, maybe not. But even though we've been talking about these horrible accident intersections, you can't blame the intersection. A lot of times people will have an accident and friends and relatives will say, oh, well, that was a bad intersection. But again, the name of the show is about the law. So let's talk about the law. You cannot blame the intersection for an accident. I have a case right here that went all the way to the Massachusetts Appeals Court. It's a sad case, actually. A gentleman was crossing Route 104 down in Mendon. Mendon is a town that's south of Hopkinton and just north of the Rhode Island border. It's outside of the Route 495 belt by a little bit. So a fellow was crossing this highway late at night, and he was killed by a car that came along and hit him. Well, the Mendon police wrote in their police report that the dark condition of the road played a part in the fatal accident. So that may be true, but what happened was that the gentleman's estate sued the town of Mendon and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, saying this was a dangerous highway and it should have been lit up. And look, the police report said that the fact that it was not lit up properly was a part of the fatal accident and part of the cause of it. Well, the case wended its way through the Worcester Superior Court, and then it went all the way up to the Massachusetts Court of Appeals, never made it to the top court, but the final ruling in the case was, no, you can't blame the highway. And the case goes through a lot of legal gesticulations that we could talk about in another podcast. It's way above, the procedure is above what we're talking about here. But basically what it said is, town and state officials have certain discretion. And the Massachusetts Tort Claims Act, which describes those instances where you can sue a city or state, says that where officials are given a discretionary function, not a ministerial function, but a discretionary function where they have discretion to either do something or not do something. Here, in this case, to either put a street light up or not put a street light up, you can't sue them. They are immune from suit. So this case went all the way up to the Massachusetts Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals says, yeah, that's right. We're sorry it's a bad intersection, or it's not a bad intersection. It's a badly lit up roadway, and maybe there should have been lights, but the state and the towns are immune to lawsuits. So I guess the bottom line I'm trying to get to here is that, yeah, there are intersections that are bad. There are roads that are bad, but you really can't blame the roads. The appeals court came right out and said this unfortunate gentleman's accident was a result of the negligence of another driver and not the bad condition of the road. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point and distinction to always make, because ultimately, a lot of the times we can't control the driving circumstances that we're under. Like, you can avoid certain areas, you can do your best. But ultimately, it's your responsibility to make sure you're doing your part in keeping people safe and knowing and proceeding with caution when you're in poorly lit up situations, not getting yourself worked up when other people are driving fast and you're in a Boston intersection and people are honking. Always follow your gut and make sure that you're making the more responsible decision. Now, enough of that. All that being said, now here's what people want to know. What is the worst intersection in Massachusetts? Andy?
Okay, this is it. This is the top number one worst intersection in the entire state of Massachusetts. Again, that's not according to me. That is according to the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, after looking at every intersection and listing the top 200 horrible intersections in Massachusetts. Now, I'll give you a clue. I am looking up Route 38 towards New Hampshire. Behind me is the bridge. It's called Bridge Street, and it goes to the downtown section of the town that I'm standing outside of. To my right is Route 110. It comes over from the rest of the Merrimack Valley, Lawrence, Methuen, and Haverhill. To my left is Route 113. It goes to the west to Tingsboro and other towns. Also, the thing that complicates this intersection, it's not just merely X intersection. The thing that complicates it is that just about a half a block to my left, your right, is Lakeview Avenue. And now that comes down from Dracut being a fairly sizable town right on the New Hampshire border, so very popular. And Lakeview Avenue feeds into the road behind me. So in case you haven't figured it out, where am I? The number one worst intersection in Massachusetts? Guess what? I'm staring right at a drugstore. You can't see it. And to my right, your left, is a coffee shop. If you haven't given up yet, I am standing at the intersection of Veterans Foreign Parkway, VFW Parkway, and Route 38 and 110, and also Bridge Street in Lowell. I'm just outside of Lowell, Massachusetts, in the beautiful Merrimack Valley, which unfortunately gets the undeserved title of the worst intersection in the entire state.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Now, Andy, where can our viewers find you at?
Well, you can go to my website, attorney-myers, myers.com. Weren't you going to tell people to subscribe and join us?
Yeah, of course, guys. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video if you enjoyed it. Please, 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 share it with your friends. We're starting out new and we're really trying to grow. So anything you can do really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
So if you have a case that you'd like to talk to us about, if you would like to just contact us through the website, through the Contact Us block, or go to the top and call us on the phone. If you have a case you'd like to talk to us about, or if you have an idea for a future podcast, we're basing these podcasts on the blog articles that I've been writing for over a decade, and we're starting with the ones that got the most attention and the most clicks. So if you have an idea for one of our future podcasts, don't be bashful. Let us know.
Again, thank you so much for watching. This has been About the Law. You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen, in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, and Derry, New Hampshire. Please give us a like and subscribe. The foregoing is offered for informational purpose only. It is not intended as, nor does it constitute, legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney who is thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies.